Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to live a more beautiful, peaceful life, then do we have the Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness show for you. Today I'll be talking with Stephen Mitchell, a brilliant author and interpreter of books including the Tao Te Ching, Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Beowulf, the co-author of 3 beautiful books with his wife Byron Katie, and the author of one of the most beautiful reads I've ever had the privilege of coming across, Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about a profound tale to open your heart and ease your life. That plus we'll talk about last straws and camels, lemon pie, chocolate and vanilla, 3 baskets, 7 cows, and colorful jackets, dream interpretation, divination, and silver cups, and what in the world mustard white wine sauce has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Stephen. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, and happy Halloween.
And happy Halloween.
That was a fine introduction.
Well, thank you so much, and a mighty woohoo! If we go back in time, has forgiveness always come easy to you?
Well, let me answer that question in a bit of a different way.
Yeah.
I've never had anyone that I needed to forgive. I've run into major problems with people in my life. My first girlfriend, who very intelligently dumped me when I was 22,
Mm-hmm.
and my old Zen master, whom I had a major problem with. But with both of them, I never experienced any blame. I always felt that somehow my share in the problem was at least as large as theirs. So there wasn't any need for forgiveness because there wasn't any any grudge that I had, any resentment, anything I was holding against them. With my first girlfriend, it took me 18 years
Yeah.
before I was ready to see her again. And I knew where she was. I wrote her a letter. I sent her my first book. It was my second book, actually, The Selected Poetry of Rilke.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote me back a marvelous, warm letter. And we met, spent 4 days together in New York. And it was as if I had never loved her before. It was as if the love I had for her at that point was a different animal than what I had been experiencing when I was a young man of 22. So I can't say that I've had an easy time or a difficult time forgiving because I've never had the occasion to.
Did you always see things? I mean, Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness is both to me a story about forgiveness, but it's also a story about somewhere between surrender and faith, and a different way. I call it the open-hearted warrior way of stepping forward into the world, shields down, with a full belief that it will all work out. It may mean you're thrown in jail, in a pit, you're accused of this, you're accused of that, but at the end of the day, the journey is meant to serve you. Have you always felt
Yeah.
that way?
No, but ever since I began intensive Zen practice
Mm-hmm.
at the age of 30, I've always felt that way. And more than that, it's more than things will be okay. It's things are okay in the moment of great distress, for example, or to take the Joseph story, um, being accused of rape, being thrown in prison. Uh, Even that, when you've had the experience that I give him inside the pit after his brothers, for very good reasons, have murderously thrown him into a stone cistern in the middle of some meadow or other where they're grazing sheep. And I give him the experience in that day of huge physical and moral suffering. I give him the experience of seeing something that allows him to turn his whole life around, of seeing that everything happens through the will of God, and I'm talking about a God who's much larger than most of the characterizations of God in the Bible. This is a God who's never even a character in the Joseph story. He doesn't appear. When God's a character, God becomes extremely lessened, so that in the first in the first part of Genesis, when he appears to do this or that, to bless or to curse or whatever, he's really not the God that the great teachers are talking about. But in the Joseph story, he doesn't appear, he or she or it, only through the consciousnesses of the characters. And that's the way any writer who's had a deep experience of reality would do it, to make God a character is to diminish God. So Joseph always, after his experience in the pit, always retains the consciousness that whatever is happening because of God's will. Whatever appears bad or harmful or stupid is down deeper, is part of the web, the fabric of reality, and has a great intelligence and joy at its center. So you can always trust it.
Beautiful. You know, it's interesting when you pull, and this is for those who aren't familiar. This is a biblical tale here from the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find fascinating when I work with people and when I talk with authors is when you pull the golden string in reverse. When you look at the life in hindsight, not hindsight is 2020, but you start to understand more of the richness of the story, and we can let go of some of the shoulds, should-haves, and would-haves, and could-haves. So early on in the story, Joseph is seen, because of a whole set of circumstances, as his father's favorite, and he, whether he wanted to, whether he was choosing to or not, he was pretty cocky and bold and brash, and really offended his brothers.
Constantly.
And
yeah, he's a spoiled brat. He's an extraordinarily beautiful child and an intelligent child, and he knows that he's the hero in his own life story, and will be for many other people as well. So he's not mature at the beginning. He's not mature enough to handle that.
And the cool thing to me is if we get an idea or understanding that there's more going on to the world than meets the eye, whether we call it, God, source, universe, energy, love, inner wisdom, there is an inner wisdom that pulls him to do things such as boldly interpreting dreams that would get him hung, so to speak, that was actually there for his highest good and the highest good of all, wasn't there?
Yeah, he doesn't, as I said, he doesn't know how to handle his gifts. So when he has a dream, two dreams actually, that show him in a commanding position over not only his brothers, his many brothers, but his father and mother, he is exhilarated at because the meaning for him, he knows that the meaning of the dream is some kind of salvation for himself and his family. And so he's overjoyed, and he can't help blurting out the dream to his brothers and then to his father, having not the slightest idea that this would be offensive to them. I mean, seeing themselves bow at his feet in homage to him, it was they take it as a very humiliating image, which to 99% of people it would be. And so they become even more resentful and angry at him, and that eventually leads to their throwing him into the pit.
When he's in the pit, what takes place? What goes on in his heart, in his mind, where he doesn't turn outward? He doesn't go to a place of blame, but instead he flips it inward and goes, "Oh my gosh, What have I done?
Yes, that's a very important moment. You could say that's the central moment in the book. And at first, he's tempted, like most of us, to feel angry and hurt and to be in a total victim space. Why did my brothers do this to me? I'm the chosen one. I'm the savior. I'm the one who's going to save the whole family. He didn't know from what, but he knows that. And that goes nowhere except to cause more suffering, more moral suffering in him. And at a certain moment, he has an experience of waking up to a very important truth. And it's as if something inside him says, oh my God, if they're so angry, if they tried to kill me, what have I done to cause that reaction? So taking it inside himself, looking into his own heart, and that one moment of change of direction over the hours where he's alone in the pit, naked, bruised, soiling himself with his own excrement, that one moment allows him to go a little deeper later and then to see actually how arrogant he's been, how uncaring he's been towards his brothers. And he can go through a whole series of uh, inner visions where he can see his past almost as if it's a movie unrolling before him of how he's been, of the arrogant little brat he's been toward his brothers. And that the pain, the moral pain from that is almost unbearable. He feels it as worse than the physical pain. That's a very important stage to go through for all of us who are interested in clarity. That moral pain of seeing how you've been treating the people who you think have been treating you badly uh, is essential for getting to a space um, of understanding and then of forgiveness.
Thank you. Do you think he was clearly reaching out to his brothers for forgiveness in his heart? Was he able to, do you believe, start to forgive himself, or was that part of maybe why he surrendered to all of these experiences that came, is he had to work through his own forgiveness over time?
Yes, it was really the same process. And in the terms of this book, which is a book that uses God language, because after all, it's taken from Genesis. It's a very Jewish book. It's a very Jewish story. So instead of talking about um, becoming in harmony with the way things are, in harmony with the Tao, or living um, in Buddha consciousness, etc., the natural way to talk about this was using God language. So once he understands from his first radical realization inside the pit that everything is happening because of God's will, that it wasn't his brothers who threw him in the pit, it was God. It wasn't his brothers who took him out of the pit and sold him into slavery, it was God. Once he sees that, the forgiveness of his brothers is the same thing as the forgiveness of himself. In other words, his own arrogance and spoiledness and mistreatment, unkindness toward his brothers is God as well. He was guilty, as my wife would say, Byron Katie would say, we're all innocent. The only thing we're guilty of is believing our own thoughts. So he would have understood something like that, maybe not in quite so clear language, but he would have understood that whatever um, whatever mistakes he was making, whatever sins, which in Hebrew equals mistakes, he had made, he couldn't have helped because he was simply in a space of believing what he was thinking. And so once you understand that, it's very easy to forgive yourself and
I
others.
I think, thank you so much, Stephen. I think you just hit something that is so incredibly important that we need to go back over and break this out slowly. I had written down the note, it was even God that helped him become a snotty brat. It is all the experience, and we can't have helped how we were in the past. We can certainly do something now different in this moment, but if we get that, it really sets us free, doesn't it?
Yes, there's no such thing as guilt in that space. And this applies even to people who have committed enormous crimes. This is not easy for some of your listeners to hear, but um, if everybody's innocent, then even people who are in prison for murder and rape are, in that sense, innocent. And my wife does a good deal of work at prisons with people who are in prison for life, with murderers and rapists. And those men who come to her events are hungry for the truth and hungry for seeing where they've messed up their lives. And it's very moving. Sometimes they can get to a greater sense of freedom than 99% of people on the outside. But it's a realization that lifts moral condemnation, not only from yourself but from everybody else in the world. If you're looking at this from the outside, you may think it's a horrible kind of thing to say, and you may think that it will create chaos in society, and people will go out and murder their neighbors if they think that there's no such thing as guilt, et cetera, et cetera. And from the outside, it's very radical and troubling. But from the inside, once you've actually seen it, seen how true it is in your own life, it's one of the most freeing realizations possible.
Woohoo!
But people can take this on from the outside and believe it without actually experiencing it. And that's not helpful.
Well, that's one of the things you are doing with your journey here, with Joseph's journey, is you're helping put the reader into the suit, into the colorful jacket of Joseph.
You know, I, that's well said. I that's the most that I hope to do with this book, giving the story further flesh and bones, taking people inside each of the characters gives them an experience of forgiveness, I think, that they may not have had before in their whole life. And as I mentioned to you before we started, I've had a number of men email me that they've had tears in their eyes or even cried when they got to the end of this book for the first time in their lives. They never do that with a book, but they did it with this. And I find that the most excellent review that I could have hoped for.
And for myself, I do cry a lot. I've started to cry a couple times during this interview. I'm watery about these things.
Yeah,
It was
Kleenex.
yes. It was just here we go. It was just such a wave of peace that came over me. And I think that peace started with a line when he's in the pit. May your will be done. What does that mean?
Well, it's a wonderful, essential prayer that that Jesus teaches and that's taught in the Jewish tradition in many places as well. And it's a kind of shorthand for letting go into reality, that realizing that what would have, should have happened is only a figment of the imagination, that what actually happened is what should have happened, that there's nothing outside that, that everything else is a wishful thought. Um, but in that passage that you're talking about, when Joseph has been thrown into the pit, he lets go into your will, may your will be done. And then he goes even further. He realizes that that very prayer is, in a way, absurd, because God's will always is done, and asking that your will be done is another subtler form of arrogance. Why do I need to ask God to let His will be his slash her slash it will be done when that's what happens anyway? Why am I getting into the act? So it's an interesting uh, further meditation on his part that he realizes that even that is trying to use his own will to control God, whereas letting go of all control and seeing that everything is perfect just as it is, though it may seem horrible, is reality.
He's pulled out of the pit. He is cleaned up-ish by his brothers. He is sold off for, shall we say, golden pennies on the dollar. In fact, the people who buy him are suspicious because they didn't even negotiate. There's a great commandment, that a love that's inside of him at some point. And I know early in my spiritual journey, I can remember actually repeating this commandment to myself as I was a professional bicycle racer trying to come back, and I had all sorts of injuries and I wanted to stay safe. The great commandment that he uses, you shall love the Lord with your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. What does that mean?
It's another way of saying what we've been talking about already. It's my wife. I, I I tend to quote her a lot because I not only I adore her, but I think she's the clearest thinker that we have today. But she uses God as a synonym for reality.
Beautiful.
And I think that's very helpful because we tend to have a lot of anthropomorphic images clustering around that word God like barnacles. And so this helps us get out of the human image of God. But if God is reality, and if you love reality more than even your beloved, even the people you love most in this life, even more than your own identity, more than anything else you can put into language, if you love reality that way, then you're in conformity with the way things are. So loving reality means realizing that any thought that would pull you into a different place, like this should have been different, is the main culprit. This shouldn't be happening, or anything that starts to move your mind into anger or sorrow or depression. Those are signals. Those emotions are signals that you're off. You're off balance. You have left reality and you're into something else, some kind of thought that you're stuck in. So the simple equation, God is reality, might be really helpful for some of your listeners.
Thank you. And if we travel forward on that line that God is reality, as we travel forward, he's sold off. People or a person recognizes Potiphar, if I get that right, recognizes
Mm-hmm.
some of his greatness, takes him as his assistant, almost under his wing for 10 years, and then Potiphar's wife starts hitting on him, on Joseph, and Joseph
Yeah.
takes the high road and ends up accused of rape and in jail. But loving reality, it doesn't sour his heart, does it?
No. And let me just add a few details to that
Please.
very accurate description. Um, he's sold into slavery. He's bought by one of the prominent courtiers in Pharaoh's court, who's an immensely powerful man, who happens to be a eunuch as well. So his wife isn't getting a very satisfied sex life, but she's okay with that because they're in the middle of the court. She has the admiration and the envy of everybody. She's beautiful, she's talented, she's married to one of the great men of the land. And when Joseph gets into his master's vicinity, the first thing that people notice about him is how beautiful he is. So he always has people's attention. But Potiphar notices that there's something else in him as well. He seems to be extremely efficient. So he calls him into his office, and within an hour, Joseph's learned to speak Egyptian very well by this time. Within an hour, Potiphar sees how brilliant he is, way beyond anything he's encountered before. And he gradually but quickly makes him assistant, and then a major domo, and then he gets him as basically as close to himself as possible, because he really loves Joseph and feels free in his presence. Everybody feels this way about Joseph. And then, as you said, Potiphar's wife falls in love with him against her will, against her judgment, against everything. There's just an overwhelming and uncontrollable attraction to him, and it becomes an obsession. And finally, and she keeps saying, you know, sleep with me, sleep with me. In the book, it's a bit coarser, but Joseph has a unbreakable, unshakable loyalty to his master, and he just won't do anything that he feels is wrong. So he respectfully keeps saying to her, "No, I can't do this." Finally, she can't bear it anymore, and grabs his robe and says, "F me," and he runs out of her room. And then she yells, "Rape, rape!" And her servants come in, and her husband comes in eventually, and she tells her story. And he's tempted to believe her, but she's not the most stable person in the world, a very dramatic woman, and with all the understanding in his heart, a compassionate understanding, he realizes that something's off about this. She's doing one of her tricks, and he puts him in prison basically for his own safekeeping. And Joseph, once he's in prison, realizes that this is not so bad. He has the use of books. He makes friends with the warden. He's allowed to give lectures every once in a while to the soldiers in charge of the prison. He goes to play chess with the warden once a week and drink a couple of glasses of beer. It's a good life. He still has his intelligence, his passion, and so he's not bothered in the least by this, and doesn't ever think of himself as a victim or as having been pushed back a few steps or having fallen from grace, et cetera, et cetera. He always sees reality, what's happening, as something that should be happening.
It's a very Zen way of being. He is accepting what is and not attached. He's not trying to. I talk to people about when we get so upset in life is when we're reading the story of our own lives, and we try to get ahead, and we actually end up tearing the pages, trying to see what's on the next page, rather than he's like, all right, I'm in here, let's make the best of it.
Yeah, and seeing not only make the best, which has, it's a good phrase, and it has a little bit of negativity to it. In other words, this is a bad situation, we'll make the best of it. But if you can see every situation, there are no exceptions, as the best that could possibly be happening, then you'll be in the current of the Tao, of the way things are. This is a difficult exercise. My wife, again, at her 9-day school, sometimes has people write down what they never wanted to take a look at, some horrible thing in their life. Could have happened in childhood, could have happened yesterday. And take that sentence and then write down a list of why that situation is the best thing that could possibly have happened. People are hugely resistant to this for obvious reasons. But once you meditate on it, once you settle into it for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, a day, a week, and open your mind to it and get through the resistance of, oh my God, this is obscene. Of course, it's not the best thing. It was horrible, et cetera, et cetera. And see even one tiny detail about it that was the best thing that could happen. Then things open up in a radical way, and you're able to fully embrace that reality that happened. So it's a wonderful exercise if anybody wants to try it.
You have, thank you. You have a brilliant sentence later in the book talking about this very thing. It's talking about Joseph and forgiveness, and you say, when you isolate it, this is isolating a bad, I'm going to put that in quotes, like you're talking about the worst thing, which may be the best thing. When you isolate it, plucking it out of the flow of time, you falsified it. It had never existed by itself.
Yeah, that's what reality is. It's a constant flow. And once you take an experience or a situation and pluck it out, as I said, and consider it without a before and after, it becomes anything you think it is. And usually that's not so hot. People superimpose their own thoughts, their own shoulds onto it, and it becomes the creature of their own thoughts rather than the vibrant reality that was experienced at the time, in the present at the time it was experienced. So that's something to be conscious of when you're thinking of, he wronged me or she should have listened or whatever. You're thinking of a specific event out of the flow of time, and it falsifies it. It diminishes it. And Joseph realizes that and is able to see things in the whole untorn apart panoply of reality.
And that is, I think of Gwyneth Paltrow's Sliding Doors. It was part of his journey. It was, if it's all God, if it's all reality, if it's all love, then that's what had to be to get us where we are here right now.
Yes. And this, I hope, is presented in the book in a vivid enough way so that people see how obvious it is. It's not sentimental. It's not, the new age hippie kind of thing. It's all good, which is often an escape from reality, a refusal to look at the hard things. It's not an easy spiritual truth that people should take into their lives, because that would always be from the outside. You have to experience it from the inside, and from the inside, it's the opposite of sentimental. It's simple, it's clear, it's powerful. There's nothing untrue sticking to it. It's the bedrock of any kind of spiritual realization. So for your listeners, what may be sounding a little sticky and sentimental at this point, from the point of view of the actual story, is the opposite of that.
Let me pull on that golden thread, in fact, for a minute. We have him as cocky, brash, snotty kid, thrown into a pit, almost dead, feces washed off of him, sold into slavery, sold again, becomes an assistant, becomes wrongly accused, gets thrown into jail, ends up reading several people's dreams. One of them set free, one of them is killed. He's not set free for several years. He's still languishing, sort of. He's
2 years of chess and reading.
Yep. So thriving in jail. Then he's called before the Pharaoh, And you take it from there, but this is pulling the thread. We can see everything that appeared. This is real. This is not the sentimental. Everything that appeared at the time to be the worst thing actually served him.
Yes, it all led to that moment. And, this is where um, I love these moments in this story, in the original Genesis story, because they're so simple and clear and powerfully dramatic. It's one of the most dramatic stories in the world, and Tolstoy called it the most beautiful story in the world. Tolstoy knew something about storytelling, but what I've done in this book is to imaginatively elaborate on the simple structure and characters of the story, uh, not to bend them out of shape in any way, but really to put flesh and blood on the bones of the story. And this is one of the great moments in that story. Joseph stands before Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him his dream, and Joseph brilliantly not only interprets the dream, but gives Pharaoh the solution for the problem that's going to happen, which is the great famine that's coming in 7 years. And what I do in that chapter is use my own experience of what happens in the mind when a clear mind makes a decision, and go into great detail. And it's like zooming in to a process where you're going from say 50% to 1000%. You can see the details, you can see the blades of grass in the landscape even. So I go into Joseph's mind and trace what happens when a mind is so open that it's not grasping after a solution. It's simply waiting there in a state of total receptivity, intelligent receptivity. And it's an amazing process. And I compare it to the process of a great athlete in the zone, which is very much what it feels like.
And I love this, and I love this part of the story, and I love the words "not I," because Joseph is so clear of mind in detailing this dream that many other great interpreters have come to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh realized he was just being pandered to. Joseph is so clear of mind that not only do the words flow through him in the dream interpretation, but he sets himself up as the solution in a sense. But it is clear to the Pharaoh that this is, whatever Joseph is doing, this is not about ego. This is not him making something up. And my guess is, if the Pharaoh had even sensed for a second that he was, it would have been, off with your head. But Joseph was even shocked at the words that were coming out of him. Not
Yes,
I.
he's both the speaker and the listener. But I want to go back to something you said about yes men. We have a radical experience of that nowadays. The storyteller back in 1000 BCE or 500 BCE knew very well what happens when you have yes men, and this the dream interpreters around Pharaoh were the epitome of yes men, interpreting that dream so that he will feel good, so that it can be only to Pharaoh's redound to Pharaoh's greatness, and they have no interest in penetrating into the real meaning. All they want to do is flatter him and please him. And he, being a great leader, as opposed to, I won't mention anything further, uh, sees that they're pandering and is disgusted at that. That's not what he wants. He wants the truth. And he senses immediately in Joseph, because he's a man of great penetration, he senses immediately that Joseph is somebody who's a servant of the truth and has not the slightest impulse to pander to him at all. So in 1 second after Joseph tells him his interpretation, in less than 1 second, he hands everything in the country over to Joseph, gives him absolute power, and trusts his own intuition about doing that. He sees how brilliant he is, how much a conduit of reality he is, and he has no hesitation in telling him, "You're in charge of the whole country now." That's huge. It's a fairy tale, of course. It's the fairy tale that we have in other cultures of uh, the poor, simple boy becoming king, and we love that fairy tale. It has a lot to do with our own situations, our own becoming the metaphorical king or queen once we've cleaned up our act. But we everybody loves that story. Children love it. We all love it. Um, and this is telling the story in a much wider context than you get in, say, a Grimm's fairy tale. So it has at its center one of the central emotionally satisfying stories of humanity.
I believe it's part of what we recognize in the story is that we all have this divinity, this greatness, this love, this specialness within us. And this is a moment where, as we identify with the main character, the greatness that is within each and every one of us is in that moment recognized.
Yes, and I love it that I was able in the book to, um, by virtue of my inhabiting
Mhm.
the characters, um, I feel that if I've done my job anyway, I can invite the reader into the characters also the way I've inhabited each character. Mostly it's into Joseph. They can see everything happening from within his consciousness. So they see the world as he sees it. But also I can step out of Joseph into, say, Potiphar's wife
Yeah.
and let people experience her situation, the agony of her obsession, the agony of her lust, which can never be satisfied. Uh, Characters like Potiphar's wife and the uh, the brothers, Joseph's brothers, are traditionally in Christian and Jewish writings and sermons uh, referred to as evil, um, because the tradition tends to want to see everybody in terms of black and white, good and evil, and that's not reality. So what I've done is to allow readers to step into her consciousness, her situation, and feel everything she's feeling. And that takes you into a sense of enormous compassion. So there's no good and evil here. There are no wicked characters. They're just people suffering from their own craziness or unclarity. And once you understand her fully, you can understand Joseph in a fuller sense as well. But uh, the fact is that if I've done my job again, I think I've done it with you, judging from what you're saying. People will have the experience of plunging into these characters at great depth and seeing the story from each one's perspective in turn.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because now you're talking about the juice of life. No good or evil, just people who are suffering in each their own way. And if we can crank up that empathy, that understanding, and put ourselves in anyone's, I'm going to go back to the metaphor, colorful jacket, how differently we will look at them, how much we will let go of that judgment. I wonder, putting yourself into these characters, and I'm guessing this is not the first time that you've done this in this way, but how has inhabiting each of these characters changed your life?
It hasn't changed my life. What changed my life was many years of intensive Zen practice and then um, intensive practice of Byron Katie's The Work, which is, in my experience, the most powerful spiritual practice that we have available.
Mhm.
But working on the story uh, changed my of course it would, changed my experience of the story. So it gave me, it wasn't that it changed my life, it gave me a way to speak about things that I'd already experienced in a different way than I'd spoken before, in a very, uh, you could say, traditional Jewish way, which applies to traditional Christianity as well. So there are points in the tradition and also points in the story that speak about God in this vast way um, as willing everything that happens on earth as it does in heaven. And so uh, it's it's not something that I've plastered on to the story.
Yeah.
It really comes from within it. And for some people who feel comfortable or more comfortable with um, traditional Judeo-Christian language, with traditional God language, this will open up, I think, open up not only the story but open up reality in a new and radical way. Also, people who have found that they're very comfortable with Taoist language or Buddhist language will be able to, I hope, um, slip into God language and still feel comfortable in that language because it's not pushing them into uh, a caricature of what God is. In other words, a smaller human reduction of God.
Beautiful. And I love that. It makes religion, or if you're not of a Christian tenet or a Jewish tenet, it makes this God language no longer scary.
Yes.
I want to go from there. And something really hit me here, which is I was thinking about you writing this book, and I was thinking about the filters that we all have. Although I'm going to talk about the filter of the non-filter as best as I can in the moment here.
Oh, good. We love that.
But because this has to do with presence is where I'm going.
Hmm.
You put yourself as Joseph writing about Joseph. And Joseph writing about Joseph is fascinating because he was such an observer of the experience and allowing, as you're talking about, the flow state, for instance, and the athlete, he was in that flow state when speaking with the Pharaoh. He was bringing incredible presence, which is what you had to do writing about Joseph. And Joseph, the reason that everything worked out as it should, there's a dangerous word, but he was incredibly present, wasn't he?
Yes, that's what one thing he learned in the pit, and I've given him my own experience with that, and it is something that comes out of knowing how to listen, out of being open about your own moral judgments, basically not believing them, and about the humility that you gain when you realize that everything is happening as it should, where when you realize that what happens is what should happen. That's such a dangerous insight. It's an insight that we resist with our whole hearts at a certain point, and for good reason, because it will uh, it will shatter our whole world image, our whole thought world. We can't hold on to the identity that we think we are and realize that truth. So it's something that is earth shattering once we contemplate it with real attention.
And it allows for such kindness, not just toward others, but maybe sort of like your wife working with prison inmates, but kindness toward ourselves. For instance, here he is now. Joseph is the head of Egypt. He's running all of Egypt. And here comes before him the woman who, in essence, put him in jail. And how did he handle that?
Well, I love that little episode. It's not in the Genesis story. I gave it to Joseph because I wanted him to have that um, that sense of closure as well. So what I did was have Pharaoh give a kind of introduction party to Joseph after he's made the viceroy of all Egypt. Pharaoh throws this little party so that all the nobles and officials and all the princes and members of the old priestly family can get to meet him. There are many around, and each one has 5 minutes or so to bow before him and to say something ingratiating, etc. And I have Potiphar and Potiphar's wife go up to him, and she's gorgeous and dressed to the T's and curtsies before him. And Potiphar is as proud as a father. She doesn't say anything, but he can tell she's feeling some kind of powerful emotion. And he has the thought, maybe she's feeling scared because I now have this complete power and I can retaliate in any way I want to. And so he makes the beautifully kind gesture of telling her after she gets up from her curtsy, um, I don't remember the exact words, but it's something like, I I wish you all the best. I hope you're having a wonderful life. And just handing that to her so she won't feel scared and know that he's perfectly fine with her.
Beautiful. And you do that again, or Joseph, in a sense, does that again. If we come full circle in this whole story from being thrown into this is a very biblical way to put it, being thrown into his salvation in the pit. Now he has his
Yes.
brothers come before him. How did he handle that?
Well, it's the same thing. That's why I felt that I could, on all good conscience, give him that experience with Potiphar's wife. In the biblical story, when the brothers come before him, he tests them in a number of ways, and that those tests, I've heard from some of my readers, are extremely obscure. They don't understand why he's doing it, but I've given explanations that seem to really satisfy the readers that I've talked to. In any case, he does
You
test
wove
them.
it well.
Thank you. I hope so. He does test them, uh, test their sincerity, and the final test is that he threatens to keep Benjamin, the youngest brother, his full brother, because he's set him up with a test that shows that he's a thief. He's stolen something of Joseph's. It's a total bogus uh, accusation. But in any case, he says to the brothers, since he's a thief, I'm going to keep him here and not let him go home to his father. And one of the brothers, Judah, stands up and said, take me instead. I'll become your slave, but you must let him go. Our father will die if he doesn't go back to him. In other words, he gives up his own life for his brother. And Joseph, at that point, just breaks down into tears and sees that something something essential, something huge and cosmic has been happening with, if not with all the brothers, at least with this one brother. And he reveals himself at that point, says, I am Joseph, I'm the one that you sold into Egypt. And then comes to the point through his explanation, which I shed a lot of light on, I think, because I give the inner workings of that. He comes to the point where he says, don't be afraid that I'll do anything different than support you, because I understand that it wasn't you who threw me into the pit, it was God. It was God who sent me down here, and you're innocent in that. And I go on to add an aspect to this, which isn't in Genesis, where he says he realizes that they're going to continue to blame themselves because they're still believing thoughts that will raise that imagination in them, and he's patient enough to wait through it and to take them through it if they're ever able to hear the reality of this situation. So it's an all-encompassing understanding and kindness that he is able to, not necessarily to express at the end of the book, but to express to the reader,
Mhm.
if not to the brothers.
Thank you. I'm going to double back to there in a minute and go to forgiveness as we wind this down. But as someone who faces the sun each morning, and I could tell you that it was 7:48. No, that was yesterday, or the last time we had before the snowstorm. It was 7:52 this morning. As someone who faces the sun each morning and prays and stays in reverence and in silence, I love the great hymn to the sun that you put in here. And
Oh, don't you? I love that too. It's such a beautiful, beautiful poem.
what does that mean
Oh,
to you? And what does that mean as a way of beingness for each day?
well, I the best I could do for your listeners would be to read the whole thing because it's so gorgeous and profound and moving. Um,
Would you mind doing
but
that?
oh, not at all. I just love that. Let me see if I can find it. This comes at a certain point where Joseph has is viceroy, and I'm talking about his. He's given a wife by Pharaoh. I have a whole wonderful chapter, I think, a wonderful
Yes.
chapter where I describe how she is, who she is, how what their marriage is like, and it's of course based on my own marriage. So that his wife is maybe 80 to 90% Katie,
She's got it
but I
going
have a
on.
truly, truly. But I talk about his father-in-law too, who's a pagan priest.
Mhm.
And in the Bible, a pagan priest would always be considered evil and um, would be attacked in many ways. But uh, in the book, Joseph is as open-minded as he about pagan priests as he is about everything else. And so I'm talking about his kinship with this man and his understanding that the man is at the highest point of Egyptian religion. There are a lot of silly things in Egyptian religion, he realizes, but this one point, this hymn, is one of the high points. So it's not so long. I'll just read it. You appear on the horizon, glorious sun, begetter of life. When you rise in the eastern sky, you fill the whole world with your beauty. Though you are far away, you send your light to the earth. Though you shine on men's faces, your pathways cannot be seen. You appear to us, and the darkness fades, and all beings rejoice, and you shine out to the limits of everything that you made. Men wake and stand on their feet. They wash and put on their clothing, and lift up their arms to thank you, then go out to do their work. Cattle browse in the pastures. Trees and grasses flourish, geese flutter in the marshes, and stretch out their wings to the sky in adoration of you. Sheep dance on their hooves, birds fly into the air and rejoice that you shine upon them. Fish in the river leap up before you, and your rays plunge into the great green sea. Creator of the seed and women, you care for the unborn child. You soothe him so he won't cry. You bring him into the air. You open his mouth and give him everything that he needs. When the chick speaks through the eggshell, you send him the breath of life and bring his form to completion. He pecks his way out and stands up, chirping with all his might. How manifold is your creation, O one and only God! How beautiful is this world, created as your heart desired it when you were all alone. How beautiful is this world with its billions of living creatures, whoever swims in the sea, or walks about on the earth, or flies through the heavens above it. What can
Woohoo!
what can you say? What can you say about that? Yeah.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Couple last questions, then I'm going to send people so that they can find your beautiful book. How important is it to forgive everyone in our lives?
there's nothing that's more important, and it's not for them, it's for us. This is a cliche nowadays. Many people say it, and that doesn't mean it's not true. Forgiveness is a freedom. And one of the things, again, I'd like to end with something about my wife too, because there's just such power there. I think the best thing that anyone said about forgiveness is what Katie said. And she said, forgiveness means that you realize that what you think happened didn't. Now you can chew on that,
Yes.
and it will always bring you something profound. But to flesh it out a little, what she means is that when you've, for example, done a worksheet, she has people fill in these sheets where you can put down your most ugly thoughts about people who've hurt you, people you haven't forgiven yet, people you're angry or sad at, etc. When you question those thoughts, the actual experience in your past changes, and you see not through the lens of anger, sadness, or resentment, but you see through a clarity that you couldn't see through at the time. And you see into the person that you're disappointed with or angry at in his or her innocence. And it gives you a way where forgiveness is the easiest thing in the world. There's no effort whatsoever. So if anybody's interested in the actual process of forgiveness, I would send them to thework.com, where you can find worksheets and instructions, etc., because it's an amazing help towards freeing yourself of these stuck places.
And the reason it's called the work is that's what gets to be done.
Yes, and it really works if you come to it with an open mind. And this book, in the same way, if you come to it with an open mind and not expecting whatever religious beliefs you have to to interfere, you can really have a deep experience of forgiveness as well simply by, as I said, inhabiting the characters. So open mind is the key word here.
Oh, it's also a fun read.
Well, good. I'm glad. I'm glad you experienced it that way.
On that note, where can people go, Stephen, to find your beautiful book, Joseph and the Way of Forgiveness, and to find out more?
Well, anywhere books are sold.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't want to mention any particular ways, because people buy books and they have their own ways of doing it. Um, I would recommend going to independent bookstores and buying a book there,
Mm-hmm.
or ordering from independent bookstores online. But whatever method you use is fine with me. You can, if you want to find it, you will.
Is there a URL that you want to send people to on top of thework.com?
Well, I do have a website as well. It's called StephenMitchellBooks.com, and they can find the book there and order it from that, or from their own favorite bookseller online.
So I'm going to mention that again for people. If you didn't catch, StephenMitchellBooks.com, and it's spelled StephenMitchell Books.com. If you didn't catch StephenMitchellBooks.com and TheWork.com, come on over to InspireNationShow.com and we'll get you over to StephenMitchellBooks.com and
Thank you.
thework.com. Oh, it has been my pleasure, and I love it. I love it. I love it. As I mentioned earlier, I've had over 1,000 guests on the show. I've read well over 1,000 books for this show, and this is so beautiful. This is a favorite. The amount of peace that I found from reading this book is just phenomenal. So
then I've done my job.
You have absolutely. So on that note, Stephen, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
Happy Halloween.
Woohoo! So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Joseph in the way of forgiveness, and begin opening up your own heart today. And shine bright.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This was beautiful.
Yeah, it went very fast for me.
Excellent, excellent. Then my job has been done.
Certainly, in spades.
Excellent. I just had the most beautiful time talking with Stephen Mitchell about Joseph and the way of forgiveness. To check out more incredible videos on changing your life and opening your heart, click here, subscribe below.